Good morning, America, and welcome to this morning's huddle brought to you by Going on Offense. My name is Darrell Moon, and I'll be your host today. Thank you for being with us. We hope you will join the conversation today. We have some wonderful things to discuss, and our guest panelist will be talking about shared responsibility for resilience. We're holding these huddles every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in an effort to support those struggling to brainstorm strategies to help to promote resources to engage better emotional well-being and to engage collaboration. That introduces today's guests. It's my pleasure to introduce to you my friend, Dr. Nancy Spangler, founder and president of Spangler Associates. I'm going to invite Dr. Spangler to take 4 or 5 minutes to introduce herself and share a comment or two about today's topic. But before I do, I want to invite those who are participating to join the conversation. If you've got a question or comment, feel free to use the control panel to send that in. I'll share it with everyone. Or please raise your hand on your control panel and I'll turn on your microphone and you can join us through audio. Now, Dr. Spangler, would you like to take a few minutes and introduce yourself?
I'd love to, Daryl, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been fun to watch some of your other videos and see some of my colleagues and friends as well. And before I start, I have to ask you, was that your granddaughter in that video?
It was.
She's darling, and she really picked up the lyrics for that song. That's a great video. So my background is a little bit varied. It's a little unique. And I have both a clinical background and an organizational background. So I started as an occupational therapist at Research Medical Center here in Kansas City. And I covered the gamut. I worked in pediatrics, rehab, urgent care, psychiatry, and the pain management clinic, which included stress management, one of the first in the country to combine the two. So that began my thinking about mind-body associations. I went back east to go to graduate school the first time, and I had an opportunity to work with a consulting company that was doing health promotion, one of the first in the country to do corporate health promotion. And this was back in 1981.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was really fun to be on the ground floor of that because the idea of preventing things rather than waiting to have to treat them was pretty unique.
Yeah.
So it was a really great background. I came back to Kansas City and spent 10 years at St. Luke's Health System here and consulted with companies on how to set up programs, develop teams to go in and do assessments and interventions. My area of intervention primarily was stress management. So we did a lot back in the early 80s of stress management interventions. I started my own company in 1994 and continued to do those kinds of things myself with some teams. I found every time I went into a company and my colleagues, I worked with some benefits consulting groups and things like that. Every time we went in, I noticed that you could tell right from the get-go by the way you were greeted even, or the way that a team was brought together to talk with your team on what could happen in this company in terms of helping people be healthier. You could just tell right away where it was going to work and where it wasn't. And
Just based on the culture, huh?
just based on the culture, are you a people culture or not?
Hmm.
I came to a point where I really wanted to learn more about that. So I went back to school the second time and got my PhD at University of Kansas Medical Center here in Kansas City. And I was able to focus on 3 areas. One was individual behavior change, 2, organizational effectiveness and leadership development, and then 3, the social neuroscience that explains those 2. So I was encouraged to look at systems approaches, how we as individuals develop our health physiologically, but influenced by our families, our workplaces, our communities, and then vice versa. How it is that healthy people contribute to the better good in a community. So I kind of honed that system. approach and did some research asking representatives from large and small, medium-sized workplaces what it is that they felt was successful in their organization to help individuals be resilient to inevitable stress, and what helped their organization be successful. So I developed a pyramid model to correspond with the terminology that Gallup uses in their well-being index. The
Okay.
majority of people, so it's like a pyramid of people, the majority of people at the bottom are basically thriving, or, some days are better than others, but essentially they're
Right.
thriving. The smaller portion in the middle is struggling a bit. They may be at risk for a mental health disorder, physical health disorder, or struggle with stress. And then at the top, those are people who are suffering. They're impaired or disabled by their conditions, and they really need a proactive and outreach approach to help them move down to the thriving part of the pyramid. And what kept coming out in my interviews with people was the idea of values within an organization and how much attention they placed on values. And that just was remarkable to me. I knew that there was a culture issue and a climate issue within the organizations, but this idea of values-based behaviors really stood out to me. So I looked at the neuroscience behind that, and what I found was people's behaviors were primed by the words in their values. And some organizations said things like, team by team or department by department, we take our values and we dissect them, and everybody can say what it means to them in terms of their work behaviors. By doing that, their automatic decision making was more likely to align with the values of the company. So if they're
Interesting.
a people-centered company, when you have to make these automatic decisions and you're under stress, your automatic processes, the approach avoid neural system, um, sometimes you do things that later you develop a narrative to explain it because
Uh-huh.
you have to make some sense of it, and you aren't aware that your automatic decisions were made for you by your brain.
Hmm.
So that priming part was really interesting to me, and how people-centric, values-based organizations are less stressful. So.
Very interesting. So I've got a bunch of questions because this is fascinating to me, but would encourage those who'd like to jump in and ask questions as well. But talk a little bit about how an organization then influences those values, because there's the idea of putting it on the wall. There's the idea of asking people to maybe rehearse it, to go over and over it. What are the elements that actually make it a part of the organization versus just something on the wall? Because
Yes,
every
yes,
organization's got their values and their mission
right.
statements, they're up on the wall. It's very common, but how do you make it a part of the actual values of the organization?
Yeah.
What do
So
companies
my
do that are
my
successful?
mantra, and the title of this interview is shared responsibility for resilience. So it is really important for organizations to provide resources to people to learn resilience skills. And I know that you have mentioned relaxation, learning relaxation skills was important to you. Mindfulness skills. That was something that I learned when I was in Boston in grad school in the first place. That was when John Kabat-Zinn was developing his mindfulness-based meditation training. And I do remember Herb Benson, the cardiologist from the Boston area, the relaxation response. He developed a
Hmm.
book and a strategy for doing that. So those became tools that I use to teach individuals. But the more I looked at the systemic model and the influence that culture has on helping people make their values-based decisions, it occurred to me that an organization needs to be modeling these kinds of skill sets. So um, I have an article that I can make available that you can share with people that I co-wrote with a partner that I've worked with in the Washington, D.C. area, Greenleaf Integrative. And their approach aligns very much with mine in that the first step is becoming aware. So mindfulness and being able to relax and slow down your automatic brain responses, or to become aware of the ways that you make these kinds of automatic decisions, is really the first step. So awareness is first, and then ways to regulate the
Hmm.
emotions, the thoughts, the automatic thoughts that you have that are sometimes negative and punishing to yourself or
Mhm.
others, critical, and then to lead yourself or others into those value-based, people-centric behaviors that are your goals. So it's ARL, awareness, regulation, and leadership.
So let me just say back what I think I heard you just say. So it really does start on an individual basis. And it's
Yes,
about individuals learning how to not over respond or respond within stress, but actually be able to slow down, be aware, to regulate. And then the more that happens at the leadership level, the more it will then
yes.
occur throughout the organization.
Exactly. So,
Interesting.
team leaders and executive leaders having that same vocabulary, and there are some tools to help people understand where they are in a stress continuum. Are you green, good to go, or are you
Mhm,
red, really
mhm,
suffering and really need professional help? And then, in
mhm.
between, yellow or orange. So that's a tool that Greenleaf uses, and it's been used by the military in the United States as well as Canada, to have this language of being able to say, here's where I am right now. I can sense it internally. I'm aware of that, and I need to take a step to regulate it. So leaders can help others regulate their emotions because we have what's called emotion contagion. Um, and another person that I really have loved following. So I didn't mention that with the systems approach, George Engel was a person who really influenced me with that, the biopsychosocial systems. But another person who has influenced my thinking is Stephen Porges. He's a researcher who has looked at the vagal nerve, the 10th cranial nerve. It runs from our brain down through our facial muscles, our neck muscles, our heart and lungs, our gastrointestinal tracts, and then back up. So it's
Hmm.
afferent and efferent nerve endings, and it helps us make gut decisions. It helps us express ourselves to others in ways that either helps them approach us or avoid us. So
Hmm.
it's that stress response system again. And this ability to relate to one another by regulating our own emotions, our own stress actions, and then leading others to a regulated way of being helps everybody lead towards those values-based goals.
Okay, so here's the big question. Is the personality and the ability to regulate and be aware of the leader of the organization critical to how that then permeates the organization? How critical and how influential is a president, a CEO, the leadership, the executives? How influential is their personality and their ability to regulate on the organization's culture?
So that's a really interesting question, Daryl. I have been able to use the top executives, CEOs, to be a vocal um, supporter of resilience and mental well-being. But I have also found when that is lacking, first line supervisors can serve the same role, um, but it really helps to have that executive leadership behind it, I have to say. Um,
Well, and how do you, so,
but I've also seen the opposite. I've seen
really?
where the
Okay,
executive leaders say, we're doing this, and by golly, we're going to have a well workplace and blah, 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 and launch a program. But if you don't have the first line supervisors, if they
support.
aren't empowered to be visible and to be healthy themselves, particularly mentally and emotionally healthy, and to have compassion and empathy and to promote policies and practices that give people the opportunity to recover from stress effectively and to make those values-based decisions, it goes to pot.
That makes sense. I believe that. So can you influence the personality of a leader? Is it possible to come into an organization and identify, either through surveys or interviews or focus groups, that the problem is in the personality of the CEO? Is it possible to actually make that awareness and encourage or engage that leader to change? Because I'm sure there's lots of people out there who belong to organizations who see their primary leader as the main problem. Is it possible to bring in a consultant or a program or a process that actually can engage that leader and change?
I do believe it is possible, but it does require some real openness on the part of the CEO and the ability to acknowledge that they want to develop the skill sets.
Right.
I think there are some leaders that's just not possible. In which case, if you have other strong leaders within the organization that can help individuals develop their own individual resilience and effective teams, even without that CEO or that executive leader, um, it can still be effective. It's not all
Well, and that's why
hopeless.
you talk about it as a shared responsibility.
Hmm.
It's both individual as well as organization. Talk a little bit about how an individual, whether they're a supervisor or a line worker or whoever it is, what are some of the strategies you found to be most successful at engaging someone through your awareness, regulation, and leadership?
So the coaching model that you use, Daryl, is excellent. And I know of other organizations that use it as well. And if you use that for physical illnesses and mental illness or mental well-being is just a parallel to that and
Mhm.
integrated in that model, it becomes much less stigmatized. People are much more willing to develop the skill sets that can help them in thriving and to teach it in that way that just like you can work on reducing your blood pressure to help your cardiovascular health, you can work on identifying emotions, pausing, naming them, framing the situation so that the next time you're better prepared to not get angry or not get upset. And when that happens again, you have a contingency plan. So skill sets like that, emotion, identification, regulation, but also the other skill sets that just help you recover. Physical exercise is just as important for mental
Oh, yeah.
well-being as it is for physical well-being. Helping people to identify the physical exercise that makes them feel good and to understand that it's okay to savor that feel good for your emotional health.
So you've mentioned lots of authors of lots of books and lots of different processes. Tell me a little about what do you do? What is your personal go-to process when you start feeling those emotions or those stress? What are some of the things that you personally do?
So I do practice mindfulness meditation. I'm primarily a person who practices it in situations as opposed to long periods of sitting. I tend to be a little uh, ADD, I guess. And so when I was teaching it in a sitting format, I always wondered, am I doing this right? Is this working? Until one day I became aware that I was more aware of everything, my own physiology, my emotions, my thoughts, my eating. I became more aware of what I was craving, and I catered to that so that if it's salty, crunchy, some popcorn would really fill the bill, and I don't have to eat 5 different things to get to that. So mindfulness to me is while I'm doing things. I walk regularly, at least once a day, somewhere around 30 to 60 minutes typically. So I will practice mindfulness, or I will practice social connectedness while I'm
Mhm.
walking. Social connectedness to me is a really important resilient skill because it helps me to use that vagal nerve in terms of happy expressions, uh, healthy positions and postures and activities that make me feel good, help me regulate my emotions and help me to do things in the community that I feel are worthwhile, that are meaningful, whether it's the community of my family or my friends or my church or other organizations within the community. Right now, I'm involved with the Chamber of Commerce here in Kansas City on an awareness campaign and an employer assessment that we just summarized for employers and tried to help them get an idea of what to do next in terms of mental health. Some of my other practices are breathing practices. One way to engage that relaxation arm of the vagal nervous system is, and it helps you to relax all of the muscles in your body, is an extended exhale breathing. So you breathe in for 4 seconds and then you breathe out for 6 seconds. Breathe in for 4, breathe out for 8. And just keep extending the length of time that you're holding the exhale. So
Why
that
does
just
that work?
engages.
What's the science behind that? Do you have any idea as to why that is so effective?
Well, so the vagal nerve, the two systems, the sympathetic nervous system is what is active when you're in fight, flight, or freeze,
Mhm,
and it
mhm.
enables you to approach something that could be of benefit to you, and it gets the heart racing, the muscles engaged, and all of the neurohormonal actions that you need for that kind of fight or flight response. And you can think of it in terms of like gamblers, or a lot of research is going on in behavioral economics, how it is that um, finance people make these quick decisions, buy or sell, based on the rewards that they'll be getting.
Hmm.
And the reward system is really strong. So that's the system too that's involved in addictions or obsessive eating, anything that's obsessive.
Mhm.
Uh, so you want to disengage that system. That's sort of the go system. You want to be able to recover and relax. In order to do that, you have to get out of the sympathetic nervous system and engage the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's what the vagal nerve helps with. So by extending the exhale, it allows the heart rate to stop, and you get greater variability of the heart rate
Hmm.
and the whole carbon dioxide balance, and lots of physiological pieces go into
Interesting.
that.
Interesting. So would you like to tell us a little bit more about this Chamber of Commerce assessment that you're doing for employers?
Sure. So we partnered with some other organizations. Another group that I've worked with a lot in Washington, D.C. is the Center for Workplace Mental Health. It's part of the American Psychiatric Association's foundation side. And I worked with them for about 15 years. Initially, our goal was to find case examples of employers that were doing things interesting in workplace mental health, and then to develop these case studies and present with them across the country at conferences for benefits people, disability managers, wellness people, wide variety of professionals.
Uh-huh.
Um, to diffuse the diffusion of innovation model that helps the employer to see other employers who look like them, rather than talking heads trying to say, here's what you should do. And that
Right.
was really a very successful experience and rewarding, because we would hear other employers say, oh, you're from the Center for Workplace Mental Health. That's how we got the budget for our ability to address mental health. So thank you. So that was really a great period of time helping to develop that center. So they have carried on, and we partnered with them. We partnered with Mental Health America and One Mind, an organization in the California area that's addressing mental health in some really interesting ways. They had developed a national assessment, and it is workplacementalhealthassessment.org, I believe. And they personalized one for Kansas City. We added a couple of questions and were able to aggregate our own data that was Kansas City employers only. And that was KC, workplacementalhealthassessment.com. The results showed that employers in Kansas City were a little bit unusual compared to the national aggregate in a couple of areas that I personally found interesting based on my own research. One was that workplaces in Kansas City tend to be a bit more accommodating of people with mental health conditions, perhaps less stigmatizing, because people responded more favorably to the idea that you could come forward and get treatment and let people know that you have a mental condition and not fear that it would jeopardize your job. So that was positive. The other area that we were more positive compared to the national aggregate was around culture and leadership engagement and
Really?
support for mental health. So that was very
And the two
pleasing.
go hand in hand.
The two go hand in hand. Yeah.
Very interesting.
The areas where we could improve, and this was true nationally, were ways to get other kinds of leaders involved and to be more helpful in allowing or encouraging people to use the resources that are available, like EAPs. So training for first line managers or supervisors in how to recognize when someone's struggling with a mental condition generally, not diagnosis specific, but just
Right.
generally. And then how to have the difficult conversation. What are just some conversation starters you could use to help a person feel okay, comfortable, not getting too personal, but
Right.
identifying work performance indicators that are not quite what they were or what they could be if a manager is recognizing empathetically and compassionately that this person could be doing better and that they could help somehow. The other area that we discovered, similar to national data, is that employers representatives who completed this assessment feel good about the EAP and the availability of it, but think that it could be more proactive, less reactive. And as your model suggests, coaching people, helping them to see that it's okay to use these resources. It's not stigmatizing. Confidentiality is there, and you can trust these resources. So
Nice.
those were some of the findings.
So tell me what you're seeing right now with this coronavirus and the pandemic and some of the most recent work that you're doing. What are some of the things, that come to mind as it relates to all this work you've been doing for all these years? It's like, boy,
Right.
we need you now. So what
Yeah.
are you seeing?
Well, a couple of things. One, I know that you interviewed a student that I mentored, Dakota Driscoll, and Dakota's work fascinates me because every single person that I've talked with has complained about their hair during this
Mhm.
coronavirus and the need for a haircut
Uh-huh.
or a good shave. And Dakota's specialization is with hairstylists. And she, several years ago, was noticing that hairstylists were expressing a lot of distress and lack of preparation for the stressors that they might face during their training. And she
Mhm.
did her research around that. So I was extremely proud of the work that she did. And thank you very much for having her um, do another webinar with you. I felt like her message is really important. Obviously, we all depend on our hairstylists very heavily, and it's an
Yes.
interesting relationship that is formed.
That has been
Um,
impacted by the pandemic, no question.
yes, yes. And you mentioned work that's been done, particularly in communities of color, where the
Mhm.
hairstylist or the barber is the person who is engaged to help deliver health messages. So that's a
Mhm.
unique approach, but could be another source of pressure on those people if they don't have some support themselves. So that's just an interesting aside that everybody I talk with is talking about their hair. So that's one area. The other area that I have seen is that with all of the remote work, initially people were just so excited to use GoToMeeting or Zoom or Google Meets or whatever
Yeah.
the Microsoft Teams. And, that was so unique and interesting. And companies were finding ways to make that really effective. Then we started hearing about ergonomic issues and pain syndromes and sitting for too long and just the fatigue of having to sit still like this. I mean,
Yeah.
I said I like to move around. I'm having a little
Yeah.
trouble sitting still this long. Um, it is an issue that I think employers have to pay attention to and allow people to just turn their video cam off for a minute and allow people to move around so it's not distracting to everybody else, but just to get some movement in. And just the need for employers to be trusting that the employee is doing all they can to cope with all the various pressures they have.
Mhm.
Actually, trust was the key component of my systems model that explained how it is that individuals and organizations can share that responsibility for resilience. The employee has to feel trusted in order to do their best job and bring their best self forward at work. And they have to trust that the employer has their back.
Yeah.
So it
Goes
really
both ways.
goes both ways.
So trust, you would say, is a foundational principle.
Absolutely.
Very interesting.
Physiologically, it's important too. And it goes back to that vagal nerve. The vagal nerve is initiated immediately upon face to face and voice to voice interaction between parent and infant. So the first days of your
Experience of
life,
our lives.
yeah. I mean, remember with your children and grandchildren, that first time you lock eyes and you can tell that infant is really trying to focus in on you and gauge
Mhm.
whether they can trust you. So the neurohormone oxytocin is released very strongly during that time period between mother and child. And with, if an infant doesn't have that foundation, it's really hard for them to develop trust with anyone.
Hmm.
So if you think of other interactions, a supervisor and employee, if you're not able to do that face to face and establish some sort of trust for their facial expressions, or if you have a supervisor that every time you lean forward to discuss something with them, they immediately have a reaction where they're leaning back, that stimulates your stress response, and
Makes
you're
sense.
not going to have that oxytocin trust hormone developing.
Interesting. So we have a question from one of our attendees that says, in fact, it's Driscoll,
Ah,
or it's
hi,
Dakota.
Dakota.
Dakota Driscoll sent this in. Hi, Daryl and Dr. Spangler. When coming into a company to build well-being, how might you involve the workers themselves early on in the process to identify their needs and engage them in developing a program in their workplace? Have you seen success from a bottom-up approach or more from a top-down approach?
Absolutely. I think the best approach is top down and bottom up. So, ways that can happen and that I've seen be very successful include focus groups with employees, and even qualitative interviews with employees as well as senior leaders. Those can really be effective because people like being asked. So that's one approach. Another approach is,
Before you leave that, I want to dig a little deeper on that.
okay.
So I think focus groups can be very helpful. Are they done best in a group environment, and who's the best to facilitate the group discussion? Is that a third party coming to the organization? Talk a little bit about both those
Okay.
elements.
So I do think that it is helpful to have people in groups for one reason primarily. What I've found in groups is that people begin talking to one another and ask each other questions. And by doing that, it gets to information that the facilitator never would have thought to ask.
Hmm.
So that can be really helpful. I do think that a skilled facilitator is important because when it's peer led, it's hard to. I think a facilitator can more effectively shut down over talkers and
Mhm.
get other people to talk who might be hesitant if it's peer led. However, the second point that I was going to make was peer support groups can be really effective. Another organization and colleague of mine at MindSharePartners
Mhm.
.org has a really great training program for peer support, developing peer support. That's an approach that's been really effective primarily with first responders, firefighters, people who have sort of a tough veneer, like, why would I get help? Why would I get professional help when I am so resilient? And yet they're put in positions where they have to deal with things that no individual should
Yeah.
have to cope with on their own. So, for example, the Phoenix Fire Department has a really excellent peer support program. What they have found is that when they recruit trusted individuals, people who are identified by the ground level people as trusted peers and people that they would open up to and talk with and seek out for help, those people, when they're trained to know the resources that are available, the professional resources, it increases the use of those resources as well.
Across the board.
Yes.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, and
The third area, so I mentioned peer support and focus groups and interviews. And then the third area is health champions. So, a lot of
Mhm.
organizations have their well-being champion, and that
Mhm.
person may be uh, an exercise buff who just really wants to help other people exercise, or somebody who enjoys nutrition. Very few are trained in mental and emotional well-being, but
True.
that trend is changing. So by training these well-being champions who are just peers, again, to be the ones to be the spokespersons and to communicate well, that can be really effective.
Nice. So we have an attendee who's raised his hand. I'm going to invite Bill to join us here and see what question or comment he wants to make.
Okay.
Good
Bill, can
morning.
you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
You're loud and clear.
Good morning. Hi, Nancy. Hey, I'm just listening to the dialogue. I've been involved in benefits for 35 years, so I've seen bottom up, top down, middle engaged, all kinds of different things. You guys have talked a lot about trust. I'm curious, as you're seeing what's going on right now, you have lots of people that are stressed out. You have CEOs who are looking at how do I make my business continue, fighting for every inch of territory that they can find and every success they can find along the way. Employees who are worried about the longevity of their jobs or even the survival of their jobs. I'm curious, in the space we're in today, is it all over the place? Is there a trust winning department that you're seeing more success in one than another? Is it just really the differences or the uniquenesses of the culture of the company? I'm just curious if there is. I'm a stats guy because I'm a guy who has to I've looked at claims for years and looked at behaviors and the reasons people do what they do, and And it just seems that that's always been a consistent place to trust, for lack of a better description. But I wonder what my mind's all over the place in this conversation, trying to think about statistically where do we develop the most powerful trust components to in today's world.
So that's a really good question, Bill. And what I heard from the participants in my own research on organizational resilience and how trust came out was in the ways that the various departments collaborated. So for example, benefits, having benefits collaborate with wellness, with EAP, with corporate communications, with executive level, I remember a person saying, I have a quarterly conversation with the CEO, a personal one-on-one. That's pretty unusual.
That's very
This was
unusual.
a huge global organization, and this person was the head of their EAP.
Hmm.
But they said we collaborate really strongly, so we've developed a good amount of trust because people see that there's one place where they can go to get information. It's a one-stop shop. It's not like I got to go here to get my benefits. I got to call another number to learn about my disability benefits. It's easy for me to understand, and people talk about it regularly, not just when you onboard as a new employee. So I do think there's something to that. The collaboration, I think, is key. I see it too. So that's, an internal system within your company, but I'm also seeing it in systems if you branch out to the whole community. So for example, this Chamber of Commerce initiative, we're working with others like SHRM in our location, the Society of Human Resource Management professionals, and other HR and benefits groups, other community groups. There's been an effort to help employers understand the role that trauma plays, how it is that a person's childhood experiences, the adverse childhood experiences evaluation, and understanding if your employees have been exposed to violence or drug use or abandonment as a child, and how that could affect them into their adult life and their performance as an employee. So that level of trust and collaboration, I think, is expressed in lots of ways when systemic pieces come together like that.
So I'd like to go ahead, Bill. Do you have another question?
No, I appreciate that. I think the collaborative piece of the answer really resonates. I think a lot in today's space. I would agree with that. Getting the various departments and the various pieces of the organization and the leadership to collaborate. I mean, I know lots of CEOs that, they have somebody down the line that has a challenge and they don't even know them. Once the company gets, large enough, the CEO's not met everybody, doesn't know people's names, and you have different agendas or different responsibilities, maybe is a better way to say that, within the framework of the company, from HR to CFO to CEO to the supervisors, and then of course down to the rank and file employees. Everybody's kind of doing their own thing. So I like the collaboration statement. I think that that's a really powerful one, that if we could get more of that between professional responsibilities, from benefits to, everything that you just went down the list on, I think that becomes, I think, a really powerful tool going into the future. I think that it almost probably at some levels internally with some companies feels a little bit like hostage negotiation, where you're trying to understand what's going on internally in your own company, with the various pieces, and maybe just the change of dialogue is really helpful with
That's
people.
just what I was going to say. That the companies where that's successful, there is a level of trust and psychological safety. So, there is this idea that I could bring up a harebrained idea and not feel like you're going to judge me, but that we could talk about it and weigh the pros and cons. It helps organizations become more vigilant to risk. There's there's a healthy balance in an individual as well as an organization. That idea that when we have a near miss, whether it's something that was a stressful situation for an individual or something for a company that could have been a disaster, and
Right.
you have to be able to discuss that in terms of what went wrong, how can we change it, not blame yourself or any individuals, but to be
Process it.
vigilant the next time, not to be paralyzed by thinking that you're going to be blamed. That
I
trust is really
love
important.
I love this conversation about collaboration and trust, and we see it everywhere. The more you actually have conversations with people, the more they're face to face, the more that there's an interaction with people, the more that trust grows. The more that communication all is done through emails or through
Mhm.
text messages, and as a society, we've moved away from collaboration to be more electronic. And
Mhm.
certainly the pandemic has brought that about. And yet those that have fared well have participated in meetings like this or Zoom meetings or conversations where you are collaborating. And I think it's an important point that businesses who want to build culture need to understand the level of trust that's needed and the need for collaboration, and to not just hope it happens, but to actually instill collaboration to build that trust that then in turn will build the culture. I love that. We see it all the time. We see it everywhere.
I really think that emotion regulated communication is the number one skill set that helps people get to that level of trust and
Mhm.
psychological safety. And it's not a skill set that we are really trained in as as we develop as children or as workers. It's not always a big focus, but in organizations where it is, I think there has been a lot of effective collaboration. And actually, I did a study for uh, Mental Health America of California, had a large project where they went to every county, every location in California where they had a Mental Health America affiliate, and they did manager training for recognizing mental and emotional difficulties and then what you can do. And there were some evaluations that the Rand Corporation did, but my
Mhm.
piece was interviewing some of those managers and trying to distill what were some of the practices that were most effective. And one of the things that kept coming up, just like the word trust kept coming up in my interviews for my organizational resilience research, the thing that kept coming up was this phrase sheet, like common conversation starters for a difficult conversation. And they would keep it in their drawer. They would open it up and refer to it. And it was like, as long as I have my safety sheet, I know that I can start this difficult conversation. And as long as I know that I can ask questions, that I know how to ask questions that are open-ended and use some interviewing skills rather than ones that get a person to just clam up right away. So it was developing some of those communication skill sets. I found that really fascinating as well.
I would agree. Yeah, difficult conversations can often be avoided or are avoided when they need to happen. And often it's because we don't know how to start the conversation without
So
being
managers
judgmental.
often fear that I don't want to get involved in their personal issues.
Mhm.
I see that they're
Mhm.
struggling, but man, I don't want to go there. Well, if we train managers to identify the work behaviors that are suffering, common mental illnesses like stress related conditions, anxiety conditions, depression often result in some really hallmark behaviors. One is difficulty making decisions,
Mhm.
emotion regulation difficulties, whether it's anger or crying, um, either avoiding people or becoming too aggressive, having trouble meeting deadlines, having trouble making decisions, feeling restless. Those are things that are pretty identifiable. And if
Yeah.
the leader can be trained to focus on those things, not what's going on with your family, what's wrong with you. Those are just not good conversation starters. But hey, I've noticed that you're missing some deadlines. That's not like you. Let's talk about that.
Mhm.
How can I help you?
Well, and it's the whole proactive prevention thing. I mean, clearly many studies have showed that the ROI is far greater when you can catch a problem early, when you can be proactive. Having managed population mental health for over 20 years, the key is not to find the best doctor for the person who's in the worst situation. The key is to
Right.
help us keep them out of that worst situation. I love your idea of the pyramid. You know, it's keeping people from reaching the top of the pyramid that's the
Exactly.
key. And the way to do that is the culture and the collaboration and the, you know, addressing difficult conversations. All of that plays into such an incredibly important role in an organization as well as an individual addressing emotional health and well-being. So we're coming close to the end of our hour. I'd
Can
love
I
to,
just say something about that?
I just want to
Because
say,
you mentioned physicians,
mhm,
and people with mental and emotional difficulties frequently go to their physician first.
mhm,
And training for physicians in having that difficult conversation is
is
important
huge
too. Yeah,
because they're often not well trained, just a
not at
primary
all.
care physician.
Exactly.
So Nancy, as we're finishing up, I would love to give you some time to just mention points, issues, communication, ideas that you had wanted to share that we haven't addressed through the questions that we've come up with. What are some important things you wanted to make sure we got across today?
Well, I've talked about a couple of models and people who have influenced me. I want to mention too that I think of our brain as being the most important thing for us to begin to understand. There's a lot of research going on. Dan Kahneman, a psychologist who has researched well-being, but he's also researched how it is we think during behavioral economic decisions. And his frame for it is system 1 and system 2. System 1 is the fast automatic decision-making system, the one that can sometimes get us into trouble, but that we really need for our own safety. And that is, it's unconscious, it's fight, flight, freeze, or seize. But then system 2 is the slower, more conscious. It's the cortical level thinking rather than the lower brain thinking. It's more choiceful. It is rational. It is slower. But in order to get there, we need sometimes to engage our physiology through that vagal nerve. And my thinking around it is that there's a third system, and that's the noticing brain. It's what is enhanced when we practice mindfulness meditation. And it allows us to notice things without judging, to not jump to automatic conclusions, to slow the process down, and to be able to engage that choiceful system 2 part of our brain, the cortical system. So that 3 brain system
Very
is a model
interesting.
that I use in my teachings as well.
I like that. A doctor here a few weeks ago mentioned on this, one of the huddles, that it's kind of like that lower part of our brains like an elephant, and the conscious part of our brains like riding the elephant.
Hmm.
Now there's a third. Maybe it's the monkey on the shoulder that's the awareness or the noticing brain that say,
Right.
let's move
Yeah,
out of the elephant level into the conscious level.
right. That elephant image brings up something that I've used too when I talk about collaborating, because if you think about employee well-being from whatever part of the elephant you're holding on to, you don't see the whole picture. You don't see that a total well-being approach really affects the elephant's ability to move forward and to
Mhm,
participate in the best
mhm.
way possible. So it's similar to the different parts of an organization or the different parts of a person. It all
Well,
needs
there
to
are so
connect.
many different elements. There's environmental well-being, and intellectual, and physical, and social, and emotional, and
Financial.
financial. There's so many elements of well-being, and all of them contribute to our overall happiness. No
That's
question
right.
about it.
That's right.
Well, Nancy, this has been delightful. Thank you so much for your comments and your thoughts and your inspiring words of wisdom.
And thank you, Daryl. I really appreciate this opportunity. I have really enjoyed hearing from some of my other peers. I wanted to mention Jim Purcell. I love the work that he's doing as well. And just the variety of speakers that you've had has been excellent. I feel honored to be able to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Spangler. So in conclusion, I'd like to mention that our panelist this Friday, May 29th, will be Dr. Timothy Graham, MD, who is the Director of Endocrinology and Diabetes for the American Fork Hospital and is the Chief Scientific Officer for Progenitor Life Sciences. He'll be talking about the employer's need for testing their employees for COVID-19, a very poignant discussion right now as employers are dealing with bringing employees back, opening up businesses, and who do we test? What if someone's only been exposed but they're not showing symptoms? Is there a way to get them tested? Do I have to wait 2 weeks before they can get them back into the office? There's a lot of issues that employers are struggling with, and Dr. Graham's got some great suggestions and ideas that we can discuss on Friday. There will be a survey that will be going out to all attendees after the huddle. We encourage you to take that survey, give us feedback. Also share with us any ideas for topics for future huddles, as well as suggestions for guest panelists. Please give those to us and communicate with us through the goingonoffense.com website on the Contact Us form. Again, we want to thank Dr. Spangler for her participation today and all her great comments. We also want to thank the organizations that have got behind the Going on Offense movement. Please check them out on the supporters page as well as the help page. Many have offered free or discounted resources and services to help you or your organization during this time. We are recording the huddle. We'll be posting that later today. And I'm going to sign off now and say goodbye and hope that you'll join us in a future huddle. Remember, we do these every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Have a good day.